I am Professor Jayakumar Sittanandam, a retired professor of commerce. You can see all my video tutorials in my website www.comtutorialedu.com, and also you can see my video tutorials in my YouTube channel Media for Knowledge. I also written a textbook on GS laws for BCom, MCom, BBA, MBA, CA, CS, CMA students. You can get my books in all bookstores as well as in e-commerce portals like Amazon, Flippers, etc. My book is also available in e-book format. Now I'm going to present to you in this video the introduction of goods and service tax law, that is GST law. The GST law or new legislations which are enforced from 1/7/2017. These GST laws are amalgamation of many indirect tax laws. Prior to the GST regime, multiple indirect taxes were implemented. The examples of these multiple indirect taxes are customs duty, central excise duty, central sales tax, service tax, etc. These taxes and duties were levied by the central government, and state governments also levying indirect taxes, namely entry tax, entertainment tax, luxury tax, VAT, value-added taxes, etc. Now there is a single tax system under the goods and service tax regime. This goods and service tax is classified as indirect tax, and it's being levied either on the supply of goods or on the supply of services. As far as the tax structure of GST is concerned, it is classified as single tax system, because at every stage of supply of goods only GST is levied. Therefore, it is classified as single tax system. Unlike the multiple tax systems being prevailed prior to the GST regime, where the taxes on production stage like central excise and tax on sale of goods like value added taxes were levied. Therefore, there are multiple tax. Now it has become a single tax called goods and service tax. It is being levied at every stage. The same GST is levied at every stage of supply. That's why it's called a destination based tax. There are various legislations under GST law. Let us see one by one. The first one is the Central Goods and Service Tax Act, and the second one is Integrated Goods and Service Tax Act. This Integrated Goods and Service Tax Act is enacted for the implementation of levying of tax on the transactions taking place between one state and another state. And another act is called the UTGST Act. It is enacted exclusively for levying tax by the Union Territories. And there is another legislation called the State GST Acts. Insofar as state GST Acts are concerned, each state is having their own enactments of GST laws. For example, Tamil Nadu enacted Tamil Nadu GST Act, Punjab enacted Punjab GST Act, Maharashtra enacted Maharashtra GST Act. Like that, each state is having their own enactments of GST laws. There is a special legislation called the GST Compensation to States Act. This act is meant for compensating the loss of revenue because of the introduction of new legislations of GST. And the central government has also framed rules for the implementation of GST laws. That rule is called the Central GST Rules, CGST Rules. Likewise, there are many legislations covered under GST law. As far as the goods and service taxes are concerned, there are three main classification of GSTs. One is a central GST, is called a CGST, and another one is called a state GST, that is SGST, and union territory GST. And the third one is integrated GST, IGST. These two type of taxes, that is central GST and state GSTs, are levied combinedly for the transactions taking place within the same state. Whereas the integrated GST is levied for the transactions taking place for the interstate supplies, that is the transaction taking place between one state and another state. These are the three main classifications of goods and service taxes contemplated under the GST laws. Now let us discuss about the structure of GST. Under the structure of GST, what type of GST is being levied based on the incidence of taxes? That's the main idea of the structure of GST under the GST regime. The first one is the interstate supply. When the supply is taking place between one state and another state is called interstate supply. For example, when the supplier is in Tamil Nadu and he supplies the goods to a buyer at Punjab, then it is called the interstate supply, for which the IGST is levied, that is integrated goods and service tax is levied. For intrastate supplies, that is supplies taking place within the same state, the transactions taking place within the same state is called intrastate supply. For intrastate supplies, the CGST and SGSTs are combinedly levied. And another instance of tax is export and import supplies. For export supply, there is no tax, that is zero rated GST is levied. And for import supply, is integrated GST is levied. These are the main instances of taxes based on which the type of GSTs are levied. Now we can see the functioning of GST Council. The GST Council is the high level body for taking policy decisions on GST implementations. This GST Council is constituted as per the Articles 279A(1) of the Indian Constitution. The members of GST Councils are the Union Finance Minister is the chairperson, the Union Minister of State in charge of Revenue or Finance is the member, and all the ministers in charge of finance or taxations of all states are members of this GST Council. Now let us see what are the roles being played by the GST Council in the implementation of GST laws. The main role of the GST Council is it is a decision making body, and it decides the policy decisions of the GST implementations, and it is also a recommending body, and it recommends the rules to be framed for the implementation of GST laws, and it is recommending the threshold limits, that is determines the threshold limits. Threshold limits means for registration the act contemplates that a person's annual turnover is above 20 lakhs, then he has to necessarily register under the act. Likewise, some thresholds limits are being contemplated under the Act, and the GST Council is recommending for the threshold limits. For example, the threshold limit for compensation levier is determined in the initial stage as 50 lakhs per annum, and now it has been increased to 1 crore and 50 lakhs. That means when the turnover is below 1 crore and 50 lakhs, then he comes under the compensation levying scheme. Likewise, the threshold limits are being determined by the GST Council, and it is also determining the GST rates. Is important thing that every now and then they revise the rates, they add some new classification of goods, fixing the GST rates and modifying the rates, etc., being done by the GST Council, which is being convened every month. So it is also a guiding body which guides to harmonize the structure of GST. That it takes care that GST laws are being implemented as per the scheme of the law. Likewise, it's playing a very important role in the implementation of GST laws. Friends, so far we have seen what are the activities that we have to look into for knowing the basis of GST law. To sum up, I just recap, what you studied, that we studied various types of GST legislations, and we also studied what are the various types of goods and service taxes contemplated under the GST laws. And we have just looked into what are the nature of GSTs. That is, it is an indirect tax law, and it is classified as a single tax system. Likewise, we just seen the nature of GST, and we also studied the structure of GST. That is, what type of GSTs are levied for various instances of taxes like interstate supplies, intrastate supplies, export and import supplies. And we also elaborately seen the importance and the role being played by the GST Council for the implementation of GST laws. Thank you very much for listening to my video on the introduction of GST laws. Thank you very much.